If you like the Lightspeed podcast, then you need to subscribe to the Lightspeed newsletter, written by a team including yours truly and delivered to your email inbox daily. Lightspeed is your essential daily briefing on all things Solana. Exclusive news, deep analysis, and the latest trends delivered in a way that's digestible and, I think, sometimes kind of funny. Stay ahead of the curve with the same insights that guide readers from Brevin Howard, Gemini, Jito, CME Group, Solana Labs, and Foundation, and many more. The link to sign up can be found in today's show notes or if you go to blockworks.co. Subscribe to the Lightspeed newsletter today. Before we dive in, maybe a show of hands. Who out here has listened to Lightspeed before? Okay, a good number. Well, yeah, I would love if you'd come find me after this. I'll be around. I would love to just hear your feedback, what you think sucks about the podcast, what you think can be better. But today I'm very excited because we're doing a live Lightspeed taping, and I'm joined by Tristan from Zeta Markets and Jayant from Doro Labs, which is the company behind Pith. We're going to be talking a little bit about Solana DeFi, which there are many things to dive into. And I think we'll just get right into the content because that's what the people came for today. Usually I screw around at the beginning of episodes, but people want the meat. So as I was thinking about you two and what you do with your day jobs, I felt like the lowest common denominator of connection between like Zeta and Pith is this idea of performance, because Zeta is launching a layer 2. And when I talked to you, Tristan, you kind of said the reason for this is that we need even lower latency. We need to be even faster if we're going to compete with the likes of a Binance. And then Pith, obviously, has a lot to say about performance. So maybe just to kick us off in this realm, I'll throw it to you, Tristan, and just ask you to explain a little bit about why Zeta, maybe somewhat controversially, is building a layer 2 and what some of the reasoning behind that is as it relates to like performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very on brand with the Lightspeed brand that you guys have going. That's what we've been
that's so true.
pushing for all these years. I guess our big goal is to really make DeFi a first-class citizen for traders. I think when we talk to a lot of these professional traders, like they're still trading on centralized exchanges. And in my mind, if that's the status quo in 5 years, like I've failed as a builder, I think. And so, yeah, it's just like a lot of it comes down to performance gap as well as some of like the usability with DEXs. When you look at a Binance, like liquidity is incredible. People can provide, ultra tight spreads. Things just like work very quickly. You have very reliable, liquidations or order placing, all these things that traders love. And then on the user experience side, it's just so easy to like bridge on, use these kind of things. You don't have to worry about wallet signing and, your own kind of key management infrastructure. So it's like really great for normies as well to come in and just be able to like have that as their first step in crypto. But what's the downside to that? It's essentially you have all these centralized players who you're interfacing with. And if people went through the FTX collapse and got burned by it, then I think hopefully that's a very visceral experience. You don't want that to be the kind of status quo going forward. So we've been building on the L1 for the last couple of years, one of the very early builders on Solana. We processed like over $12 billion of volume for over 100K users, which has been super impressive. And we did this fully on-chain order book model, which has worked pretty well so far, but definitely we're kind of running up against all the performance bottlenecks, I guess, of the L1. So like the 400 millis block times. Congestion, I guess, has been a real thorn in our side most of this year. And so we took, like you said, kind of the controversial opinion was to go down this network extension or L2 route. So like owning a bit more of that infrastructure lets us get really fast. With this sequencer model, we can get thousands of TPS. We can get 3 to 5 milliseconds of latency, which is actually faster than Binance, which is really cool. We can have all this like standard infrastructure for trading, like REST and WebSocket connections for market makers, meaning that people can actually provide really tight liquidity and people can actually start trading competitively on chain. And so, yeah, that just like lets us unblock a lot of the performance. We can do a lot of that computation off chain, ZK verify it and still have it provable, have the assets and custody on chain. So hopefully getting the best of both worlds.
So I feel like I do need to follow up on this because there's, pages and pages of tweets written in like the Solana world about why using a sequencer to like scale a blockchain or increase latency is a bad thing, and you need globally shared state, and it's maybe less decentralized to have a sequencer that's processing transactions as opposed to the layer one itself. So what's been some of your response, I guess, to maybe some of the pushback in the Solana world and the people in Solana's maybe dislike for layer twos?
Yeah, I think like the initial knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, we're a monolithic chain, we don't need that kind of stuff. But I think there is a nice overlap in the Venn diagrams where there are things you can take from both sides. What I like from how we're building things is we're getting to benefit from both sides of things. So if Firedancer comes out and Solana becomes more performant and we scale with Moore's law, that's fantastic for us because the DA bandwidth that we get, to be able to post all these batches onto Solana just becomes much cheaper and much higher throughput. So we benefit from that. But then we also get to tap into years of research on Ethereum's kind of like scaling roadmap, a lot of these like ZK proving stuff that is becoming like really accessible these days and is also growing in popularity on Solana. Like Risk Zero now has all these like pre-compiles for Solana, Light Protocol doing all this like compression stuff, which is really cool. So we get to benefit from both those things. I don't think it should be like one or the other necessarily. And I also don't think rollups are for every application. I think most things should exist on the L1. I think it's this idea of network extensions where very niche verticals or things that need ultra low latency, high throughput, stuff like we're doing with trading, I think makes sense.
So then Jayant, walk us a little bit through what is the challenge from an Oracle perspective of getting price data on a decentralized exchange on the layer one so quickly? Like what's the challenge involved there? Maybe just like for people who aren't as in the weeds as you are.
So, Pyth is designed to be this really high performance Oracle that has really high frequency price data. And we launched initially on Solana back in 2021 because Solana was the fastest blockchain with the 400 millisecond block times. And we thought, we actually thought that initially we were thinking we would take the data from Solana and actually bridge it to other blockchains. But one of the things that we quickly realized when developing it on Solana was that you're actually competing for block space with a bunch of other applications. And early on, like Pyth was doing something like 30% of all Solana transactions was coming from Pyth. It was a huge number. And you can run into all kinds of different problems. Like there's some really in the weeds technical problems around how Solana locks accounts and like read and write locking. And like, it just creates like the fact that you're sharing the state with everybody else actually can result in a lot of problems that like make it harder to actually deliver the prices on time. So this is actually one of the reasons why Pyth today actually runs on its own blockchain called Pythnet, which is a fork of Solana, right? So it has that same performance, but because it's an application-specific chain for Pyth, we don't have to compete with all the other apps, and that allows us to have a much lower latency and higher fidelity data feed.
And you've just enabled slashing, to my understanding, for Pyth stakers. So what was kind of the roadmap to getting to that point, and how do you think that's going to kind of improve what Pyth is able to do Oracle wise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Pyth, we recently launched Oracle Integrity Staking, which basically allows anybody to delegate a stake of Pyth tokens to data providers. So very much like delegated proof of stake. And they earn rewards for delegating that stake. And then if there's a problem with the data provider's feeds, they get slashed. And historically, this has actually been on our roadmap for a long time. I think staking for oracles is a pretty natural idea that a lot of people have thought about, and it's certainly something we've thought about. But one of the reasons that we're really excited about it right now is that I think oracles have always been a place where they're kind of core infrastructure, but if there's a problem, then the losses that are incurred on the other side are really significant, right? And we've actually seen a number of like Oracle failures that have caused major problems in the past. And I think
can you like go deep there? Like what's the big loss that happens when Oracle data is stale?
Oh, sure. So I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can have a problem, but like take it concretely. Let's say you're building like a borrow lending protocol. And the way a borrow lending protocol works is someone shows up and they deposit collateral. So they deposit 100 SOL in that thing. And then they say, I want to borrow some USDC against that, right? And the logic is effectively, I take the price of SOL, I multiply by the number of SOL. That's the total value of your collateral. And then you can borrow 50% or something. And so if someone gives you the wrong price for SOL, like, for example, let's say the price is 150 now, but the Oracle gives you 0, then like you're going to liquidate that position, right? So it's kind of a situation where even a single bad price can basically result in permanent losses and just who knows what's going to happen, really, right? I mean, it's going to cause chaos. So, and we have seen some instances of this, not recently, which is actually kind of my point, which is that I think we've made a lot of progress as an industry, actually, on mitigating Oracle risk, like not just Pyth, but I think broadly. But I still think there's some trepidation from builders, who are always kind of worried about that risk, right? So I think one of the really cool things about integrity staking from Pyth is that it's kind of like a testament to the safety, right? It's like, look, like all this capital is backing the product. Like there's some, just like a statement of the fact that like we're really confident that the feeds are accurate.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So, to stay on brand, as Tristan said, we did have to talk a little bit about the Lightspeed aspect here, but we also kind of are speaking about just the state of Solana DeFi. So I wanted to get a little bit into maybe the past and the future. For the past, I want to kick it to you, Tristan, because you've been around since 2021. Is that correct?
Yeah, technically end of 2020 even.
Okay, yeah. So really in the early days, I was just I did a piece this week at Blockworks about something like of Solana products that raised in 2022, 26% have failed and only like 60% have shipped any kind of product. And in 2021, it's, 15% failed maybe and 75% shipped a product. But, all that to say, there's kind of this pre and post FTX thing going on in Solana DeFi where FTX was very involved in building out the early days of Solana DeFi. A lot of companies, businesses got shaken out when FTX collapsed. And it feels like there's like a just much different vibe these days from the early days. So I just would be curious to hear you retrospect a little bit and reflect on how kind of the pre-FTX version of Solana DeFi is different from today in terms of the projects, the outlook, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's completely different ballgame, honestly. Like we got into it in the very early days. There was nothing out there other than like one tutorial that some guy had basically created on Solana. Like there was almost no developer documentation, like Anchor framework, if you guys have used it for development, just like was not a thing. So it was very painful to get started. And so I think it just drew together this like cult of like masochistic devs who just like wanted to learn Rust and like pack bytes into on-chain accounts themselves. So that was a fun experience. And there was that whole meme of like chewing glass that went around the developer community and like totally really leaned into it. He's like, yeah, if you want to just like copy paste EVM contracts, across all these forks, like go ahead and do it. But there was like a, the weird subset of people who just wanted to do Solana and cared about performance. So it was like a very small developer base, I think, and like not that many projects, although the hackathons, I guess now, which is like the Colosseum ones, but like the original hackathons, which is actually what we came through, attracted a bunch of devs and people were building a lot of like early things. So it was really cool that it started flourishing in 2021. I think price going up definitely helped. People started noticing about it. People saw the kind of specs, but it was getting a lot of these developers who I don't think had worked in other ecosystems. They were like completely new to crypto or just kind of building things from scratch, which was kind of cool. So also noticed there was like a big HFT trading crowd, like a lot of like Jump affiliated people working in the kind of HFT space, totally really red pilled, I guess, us with this NASDAQ on chain kind of quote that he had. And that was why we kind of wanted to build there, like Pyth as well. I think we were one of the first apps to like integrate Pyth when it first went live. And that was like really cool. And then FTX kind of happened and that just kind of wiped everyone. And for me, that was kind of weird because I went through this initial Solana bull market where we had so many competitors. So it was probably like, we were doing options back in the day and it was like probably like 10 options exchanges, like 20 perps exchanges. And I was like, oh my God, like everyone is just here. And then to your point, like a bunch of them just didn't ship a product or their treasury was on FTX or they just pivoted to AI or whatever in the great like winter there. Many of them didn't survive. And then now we've got this renaissance coming back and it's so different. Because I remember in the bear market, like I was talking to the other builders, or I remember I was in SF chatting to Tolly, and people were like, how do we get the users? Like no one is using these products, even though they're pretty scalable and they work. And what people, I guess, in the retail domain wanted is like new tokens and reasons to bridge over and actually use Solana. And so people were like, yeah, all these apps should probably launch tokens. And so people were pressuring all the main DeFi apps to do it. And there was no concept of like meme coins. Like you talk to these people who are all about like trading and latency, and people would just not even look in the direction of meme coins. And then Bonk happened, which I think was a big catalyst. And now you've got like Pump.fun and Jupiter and all this like crazy wacky stuff. And it's just completely different to how it was before.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Jayant, you came from Jump prior, right?
Yeah, that's right. I used to work at Jump. Jump initially, started building out Pyth, right? So Jump was very involved in the Solana ecosystem. And so I started at Jump working on Pyth there, and now we have our own company, Dura Labs.
Were you kind of aware of like the Solana world in the earlier days while you were at Jump, or were you just like at a different part of the company? I guess I'm curious how that.
No, I mean, I was around when Pyth launched, so I was working on Solana in 2021, so probably a little bit after Tristan, but yeah.
And what's been your experience of how things have changed, or just how the present is different from how it was back then?
I mean, certainly the meme coins are different. That's definitely interesting. I think things have actually gotten a lot more polished. Like a lot of the apps and stuff, like the UX is a lot better. You can definitely see the improvements there. Actually, the chain works a lot better too. So there's a lot of things that you can see have improved.
Yeah. So I want to go into meme coins a little bit. Maybe if we're going to go like past, present, future. Currently, a lot of the DeFi activity that happens on Solana, for better or for worse, it's caused by meme coins. You're seeing right now a really big, like this week, a big surge in DeFi activity. And a lot of it seems to be caused by a lot of interest in meme coins. I guess, this is just for either of you. Sort of, do you make any meaning out of meme coins? And then maybe relatedly, I think I saw a tweet basically like there's this critique of DeFi from 2021 that it didn't actually do things that finance does, like help you buy a home or start a business, but it just helps people to speculate. And there's a critique that it's still doing that in 2024. So I'm curious if you think there's like a next evolution of DeFi beyond meme coins. So maybe a little bit of a compound question, but first of all, like, what meaning do you make of meme coins today, and where can Solana DeFi go beyond that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm not like a super deep like meme coin enjoyer myself, although I have like dabbled a tiny bit. So I don't necessarily see that as like the end state of things, but I think it's been great in terms of, it has like load tested the shit out of Solana, which has been amazing. And like all these apps have actually just like onboarded a lot of usage and activity. And it's kind of means that I think the stage is set for kind of things to evolve from there. I mean, it's probably not too different from early days of the internet, which I think were probably just largely a lot of scams and stuff like that. And so you always go through this kind of growing phase, I think, where you need to kind of get through this. So I think, like meme coins have like, maybe you don't make money from them, but it's managed to test things out. A lot of the use cases, people have built all this kind of financial infrastructure, which is really cool. I think a reason why that exists is we have been in a bear market where things have been pretty choppy and going sideways. People are looking for volatility. That's why they're in crypto. Otherwise, they'd just be putting their money in, like T-bills or something or other and doing something a bit safer. And I think in a bull market, which is probably going to come, don't quote me on that, volatility is going to increase for everything. I'm sure Sol will rip to some like pretty crazy highs. And then I think people will start rotating back into majors and wanting to trade that more. That's why I'm like busting my ass trying to get our new perps exchange out there, because I think there's just going to be a big wave of liquidity. People are going to want to trade with leverage in size on some of the majors as well once volatility starts picking up across the board. But we've also been taking this as a signal of meme coins are great. It's just like permissionless markets, spin up whatever you want, trade it. You don't need involvement of like sophisticated liquidity providers and investors. Like these markets just kind of self-regulate. And so we've been thinking more about how can we cater to long tail assets. We don't want to just be boring and like, let's just take what exists in traditional finance and just put it in a smart contract and like build the exact same replica thing. Like I think there's unique bits that we need to lean in on the crypto side. And people have definitely said, if you're just going to copy one for one Binance, like just not that interesting. So if we can lean into like really quick listings, tail end assets, stuff like that, and being able to do it with like permissionless liquidity, I think that would be really cool for perps. And we haven't really seen that kind of exist yet. There are definitely some blockers, but we're trying to work through that.
Jane, do you have thoughts?
I don't have predictions on where meme coins are going to go or what the next trend is. I think that's a super hard thing to predict, and I certainly would not have predicted the current meme coin craze, so I don't know why you would trust me on that at all. I do want to give credit, though, to, I think, the DeFi infrastructure that's been built and the capabilities of that. And I think it's a little bit maybe unfair to say that the only purpose is speculation. I mean, I think the promise of blockchain has really been the ability to enable mutually untrusting parties to transact, right? That's kind of the whole thing that we're doing. And if you look at the DeFi primitives that people have built, they're really enabling those use cases, right? You can trade like with leverage against a pool without trusting someone to maintain that pool, right? You don't have to trust CME or anything like that. Or same with borrowing and lending. So a lot of the actual DeFi applications are doing the things they need to do. I think the obstacle to the sort of speculation piece is that, you know, there's a lot of regulatory barriers for bringing some of these, say, more traditional assets, you know, and making them tokens, right? But if you had tokenized Tesla stock, I mean, everything else would work, right? So it feels to me like that's more the problem than the DeFi piece.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess to look into the future a little bit, something that hasn't really come up today in the Solana panels at all that I think is interesting is some of these alternative L1s that are coming to market, or like more performant L2s. So Monad would be one. I guess Barachain, Mega ETH is another one. And I think this is something that like is going to become more relevant to Solana once these things actually hit mainnet, because the real benefit of Solana today is that nowhere is like as fast and cheap and has the amount of developer excitement, the cool factor, I guess. And some of these newer, you know, layer ones or layer twos are sort of trying to lean into some of the things that made Solana successful. So I guess like maybe I'll start with you, Jayant, because Pyth is broader than just Solana these days. But how do you kind of see that playing out as far as like other performant chains coming to market? What's the impact that that'll have just in DeFi in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from the perspective of Pyth, you know, we really want to make our market data available everywhere. So whether it's an L2, whether it's another L1, like we think that application developers everywhere should have the best data, right? So from that perspective, I think it's pretty clear what we want to do. Now, in terms of where the actual trend is going to go, I don't know. And I think there's actually a really interesting sort of set of trade-offs that's being kind of played around with here. And I don't exactly know what users are going to prefer, but when you think about these layer ones, there's sort of fundamental limitations on how fast your block times can be. And this just comes down to physics, right? There's the speed of light, and all the validators that are globally distributed need to communicate. So, you know, the speed of light around the world, I think, is like 200 something milliseconds. Don't quote me on that. I should probably know that number. But anyway, it's something like that. Okay. So that means like, what is it?
I think it's like 120.
All right, great. Perfect. That's the whole way around?
Yeah.
Okay, great. 120. So
I think maybe that's one way around. Yeah.
Yeah. So in my head, I'm like, is it halfway or whatever? Point being, right, if everybody all around the world has to communicate, there's a fundamental limit on how fast they can synchronize things, right? And if you're running like a centralized L2 sequencer, you can obviously go way faster than that because it's a single computer, right? And things like NASDAQ run on a single computer, and those are at way higher levels of performance than any blockchain that we'll see. And it's clear that they will always be faster, right? That's just physics. So in some sense, the performance of these centralized sequencers is always going to be better. But there is a trade-off, I think, on the censorship resistance side. Whereas when you have one of these L1s, because the validators are kind of rotating very frequently, you actually get a better censorship resistance property where it's like, you know, look, if the current leader is censoring me, I'm going to get a new leader in a second, right? Whereas with some of these L2s, the way you get censorship resistance is you actually have to submit a transaction to the underlying L1, and then there's some like window within which they can include your transaction. So if you have some really latency sensitive application, like maybe an exchange or something, and you're worried about censorship, like maybe that's not a good fit for an L2. But then like, maybe you kind of trust the person on the L2 enough to do the thing. So I don't exactly know how the trade-offs are going to play out, but there certainly is some set of trade-offs here.
How much do you think that censorship resistance is going to come to matter? I guess I ask just because it seems like blockchains have shown themselves to be relatively at the will of regulators and sort of what governments want to do. And so there are like fully kind of uncensorable blockchains, but I don't know, if you can't buy the Solana token with like money from your bank account, it's hard for these ecosystems to actually grow. So I guess I'm just curious to push there and see, like, are there specific cases you think where censorship resistance especially matters, or yeah,
that's a good question. I mean, I think censorship resistance is one of those properties where for 99% of people, they're not going to care because like, they're not being persecuted by their governments or whatever. But for that 1%, it's really, really critical. So, the problem with that, though, is then the 99% are going to say, well, I don't really care about that. Why don't we build the thing that's censorable? And then, the 1% is going to get screwed on it. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. Tristan, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I feel like I believe pretty hard in censorship resistance. I mean, otherwise we may as well just build the blockchain on AWS and call it a day. But yeah, I think it matters a lot, and that's what we're kind of striving for. I agree with the points where if the thing is so decentralized and we go through all these hoops of, I don't know, like building something Cosmos-esque and that's like really decentralized, but like the bridging is a pain and it's hard to get your funds in there, like no one's actually going to use it, and therefore it like doesn't matter. So you need to like walk this line essentially. And I think Solana's done it very well. Like I think Solana is genuinely like a very decentralized network these days, but also has incredible performance guarantees. It's like fast and cheap, which is like good for consumers. That's what we're trying to walk the line with as well. Like we're doing this L2, which some people are going to be like, oh, centralized sequencer. But, there is like a roadmap towards like really good decentralization there. Like you can always bypass the sequencer and go to alternative ones. It's only the preferred sequencer that gives you these extremely fast confirmations. And there are other ways to just basically ditch it and go, well, like directly to the L1 if you need to withdraw funds. You can always get around like a kind of censoring sequencer. So we're kind of baking these things. Yeah, maybe they're not going to be in our testnet in a month, but like we've got a roadmap towards like fully decentralizing. Same with the bridges and light clients and all these kind of things. They're on our roadmap. We've got like specs for them and like actively working on it. And I think that's like the mission, and you need to gradually decentralize and get to that point.
And if I can just jump in here, I actually think there's an interesting set of like engineering things that you can do here to kind of address these risks. Like it's not like the only options are layer 1 and monolithic L2 sequencer, right? There's going to be a whole range of other things that have different trade-offs here. So definitely interested to see kind of how that plays out too.
And then returning to this initial question of the new L1s and L2s, I would think, Tristan, that just from a competitive standpoint, you've been on Solana for a long time, and you probably are like aware or thinking about the competitive dynamics that could emerge if Monad becomes the new cool place for developers to build. So I don't know, what's sort of your framework for like the risk involved with maybe new L1s coming to market? How much of it, or something like Mega ETH, how much of an impact do you think those are going to come to have? Are you worried? Do you not lose sleep at night?
It's an interesting question. I don't worry about it too much now because I feel like Solana's just really found its home. I mean, definitely I would be lying if I said in the bear market, like we didn't look at what else was out there and just kind of like suss out what's happening, because it did feel like this existential risk that, hey, I'm building on Solana and there is somewhat like a non-zero chance that it might just not make it. Not that it would be like, an EOS of this cycle like people were saying, but, people were worried for sure, but we actually did this evaluation. We went through and we looked at all the other chains and we were like, are these things actually going to fundamentally like support our product and let it run at the throughput that it needs to do? And I couldn't find an answer for something that would support it. So that's why we decided to stay on Solana. There's definitely some new interesting stuff coming up. I think with the last wave of things, like there was a big exodus to like Aptos and Sui, I remember like 2 years ago, but for us, it was not that like clear 10x improvement. I mean, Sui is catching a second wind now, which is kind of cool to see. Yeah, I don't know. Like Monad seems pretty interesting. Definitely, like they're re-engineering a lot of things. For us, I'm maybe slightly less interested because we're not EVM builders, so we just don't have that technical debt, I guess, to deal with. We just like do everything in Rust, and that's our thing, and don't have to deal with the EVM. Thank God. Yeah, other ones are super interesting. Like the way I think like what L1s fundamentally, as long as the tech is good enough, if they can build community really well and like plug you in with an audience and like liquidity. Like credit to the Barachain guys. I think they've done like an incredible job. Like they're just working super well on the BD side. Just here's your product. We're going to bring in like hundreds of millions of like TVL or billions of TVL in there with tons of users, hopefully when mainnet hits. And that makes your life easy because that's actually been the hardest thing for me is like I can build all the smart contracts. Like getting users and getting traction is impossible. And then on the Mega ETH side, not too worried. Like we're building actually, to be honest, something like pretty similar, which is just like how do we make the thing go extremely fast and offer these like really fast soft confirmations. So hopefully we will have like a pretty good competitor on Solana.
Yeah, that was a nice like comprehensive overview. And yeah, thank God there will be users and liquidity for Vape to Earn when it comes out. That's the product I'm personally most excited for with all these new Alt L1s. Someone build it on Solana, please. I will write about it.
DePin's the future.
Exactly, yeah. So I think maybe we'll conclude here with a bit of an homage to my usual co-host, Mert, who could not come. We left this chair open for him just, as in remembrance. But something I appreciate about him on the podcast is he is definitely a Solana fan, but he's also can be honest about its shortcomings in certain ways. And so as we think about the future of Solana DeFi, there's trade-offs and issues today with the blockchain that you would like to see fixed going down the line to maybe build out some of these, beyond meme coin features or to make the chain faster or things like that. So the question I'm going to leave both of you with is just what's like one improvement, one way that Solana needs to get better to push DeFi even to the next level? I asked that question in a really roundabout way to give you both time to think because I did not prep you, but I'll let you both chime in as inspiration strikes.
There's like a lot of things. I got to think about what's the most interesting.
I think if you're specifically talking about DeFi, anyone who has worked in finance understands that latency is super, super valuable. And this is on a level that will seem just insane to any normal person. Like I have seen people spend millions of dollars saving like a microsecond. Okay. So, Solana block times are 400 milliseconds. That's like, I don't know, it's like a second to a day kind of a difference. Okay. So it's a completely different time scale than these blockchains operate on. And so if you're really serious about competing with something like NASDAQ, either you have to come up with some different DeFi mechanisms that make it so that people don't care about that level of latency, or you're going to have to support, that level of latency, right? And I think supporting that level of latency with a globally distributed blockchain is going to be very challenging, right? So, but there could be other mechanisms, right? I know, I'm sure there's not a lot of Gary Gensler fans here, but Gary Gensler has been pushing for like these like batched auctions in the traditional finance markets, right? Which like, I haven't thought about that deeply, but that's like the kind of like way that you could potentially make it so that latency wasn't quite as important.
Mm-hmm. And Tristan, what about you?
I think just like on the tooling side, I'm looking forward to that getting better. Like I used to do a lot of the painful indexing in the early days. Like, how do you pull data off the blockchain and make use of it? There's like this lack of like homogeneity in terms of like the IDLs that people use, which is like the definitions of what's in your program. So like parsing all these events and doing all that kind of stuff was like pretty cancer, to be honest. And I don't think people still have like a unified system of how to do this and read blockchain data and make useful applications. Like Helios did a really good job with some of their webhooks. We use it like religiously, but yeah, there's still stuff like that that's like not well agreed upon. I know like some of the new Solana spec has this like typed bytecode. You can just kind of read it directly. It's kind of like baked in as a primitive. That'll be really good. And I know that's like still a pain point today, like many years down the line, which is a bit disappointing to see. what else? I think just like stability is a big one. Like we're running an exchange. If we're going to have like tens of millions of dollars of open interest, like we want to have really good reliability. It's been getting way better, obviously. I think having multiple clients is like fantastic. Especially like the jump fire dancer one is just like, let's rewrite the entire thing in C++ and hopefully not introduce the same bugs that are in like the existing clients. So all these things that I think harden the network, and then people, I guess, hopefully that build in like 2 years won't have to worry about what we had to deal with back in the day, which is like, could Solana go down and then all these kind of positions that we have get liquidated or have issues. So it's progressively getting better, and I think it's on a good path, and full credit to Tolly, man. Like this guy had a vision multiple years ago on like how the design would look, and it really hasn't deviated from that, and it's like scaled pretty damn well. So it's super impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think good place to end on that note. So that is all the time we have for today, but thank you all for coming out, and please give a hand to Tristan and Jayant for coming out. Check them both out. They're on Twitter, all those places, and we're going to transition into our next panel.